CityCast from Explocity.
Is journalism history's first draft? Much of journalism is reportage, which is understood as the style in which news is reported. This can be factual or biased, and if experts are handling the bias, you won't even notice it. Evidently, what matters is not the journalist, but what he reports and how he reports it. Martin Luther King was enough of a realist to say, "We are not makers of history, we are made by history." Most politicians in power will say, openly or through their actions, that they are the makers of history. Outwardly, it would appear to be so. Who can deny that Narendra Modi is a maker of current history? What history he makes is a different issue. The logic of power surpasses individual quirks. This book examines certain individuals who made themselves special by working for the common good. Sometimes their concept of the common good wasn't very good at all, but that did not reduce their historical significance. What, after all, is the significance history gives to events? Marx gives us food for thought when he says, in the course of an article he wrote for the New York Herald Tribune in June 1853, England has broken down the entire framework of Indian society. This meant loss of the old world with no gain of a new one. It imparts a particular kind of melancholy to the present misery of the Hindu and separates Hindustan from the whole of its past history. The story of the individual helps us to understand melancholy as well.
There is a point late in the lives of the very accomplished when they unscrew the caps of their pens to write a compelling memoir of their lives. But how does a self-effacing journalist write an autobiography? By not writing one. Not in the stock sense anyway. My guest today is journalist TJS George. He is 94 years old. His life as a working journalist began when he was only 19. That was in 1947, in the months soon following India's independence. And ever since, George, as a journalist, has had a ringside seat to India and to every twist in its tale. Journalists always have had the best stories. After years of working their profession as a little pitcher with big ears, fly on the wall if you prefer, they wait impatiently to fill the ears of the world with anecdotes. But instead of all that, George's latest book, The Dismantling of India, is the closest we are getting to an autobiography. Unless, of course, he decides to up and write a classic memoir. I read this book as a narrative history of India to be harvested from the biographical portraits of 35 Indians. They include people from art, entertainment, politics, science, business, crime, and cause, profiles at times in contrast, sometimes in concert. But the word dismantling in the title of the book amounts to disappointment, because from the day he joined as a rookie reporter, the newly born India has been on a downward trajectory, aging poorly day after year after decade. Biographies bring people to life as a tapestry of the stories of their lives. An autobiography is supposed to do the same thing, but a personal narrative gives an author license to a point of view, an explanation, or even an excuse. George has no use for excuses, and his writing leaves no wiggle room for explanation, and the reason I equate this book to an autobiography is because it seemed to me that he was expressing his own life story through the aggregate of the stories of the lives that he has profiled. TJS George's writing is not misplaced modesty. It seems to come from a conviction that he is first and last a journalist, and thus the story should come first, second, and last, and any trace of the writer's presence be excised, except, I'll say, for good example to every journalist. And now I am deeply privileged to have the opportunity to present him. TJS George, welcome to the Literary City.
Thank you.
What was your first memory of becoming politically aware?
The moment I joined journalism, when I was about 20 years old, well, it was politics. From there, every day, anything I did was political as a journalist.
You were 19 when India got its independence, and 19 means you were coming into your own at the time. What was it like? Was it emotional? Was it exciting?
I was in last year college when independence happened.
Right.
So all I remember was that every evening we got together for an evening, not prayer, but an evening session when somebody would have some kind of a prayer, yes, without any religion in it. And all I remember is that in 1947, I started the tradition of singing Jana Gana Mana at that evening session, yes. That is the only thing I remember. Maybe it was a good thing, so I remember it.
I suppose. What was the feeling? Patriotism?
Yeah. No, I would say patriotism is a big word. The mood of the time, you're talking about independence.
Right.
Mahatma Gandhi, Nehru. So, something like that, some sentiment like that.
You've had a ringside seat to everything that has happened since independence. So have the events of the last 75 years changed you from time to time?
In a sense, yes. I mean, not changed me, but changed my impressions of how India is progressing.
And how has India been progressing?
I think India has not done well in these years. The progress has been negative. I think mostly because of the introduction of communalism in the public life. Today, for example, people look at, not people, but some people look at me because my name is George. So they say, oh, you can only have a Christian view, which is ridiculous. I believe in no religion. But I can't change, I don't want to change my name just for that.
And to what?
And yes. So that kind of understanding is missing. And in fact, the tendency has grown stronger to define people in terms of this religion or that religion or this ideology or that ideology, which I think is unfortunate.
You've mentioned that the progress has been negative, but was there any point in time during these 75 years that made you happy?
I wish I was very happy. No, I was happy in a professional sense on a few occasions. But in a political sense, no, I was never at a point when I was happy. In fact, I've been progressively getting unhappy because of the way politics was changing.
Never a sign of progress? Did it ever look like it might get better?
It has been going down, getting worse because of the introduction of communalism into it, the way the BJP has grown, the way people like Narendra Modi have become, big names. He's a man who looks at things purely in communal terms. When Muslims were being killed in Gujarat when he was Prime Minister, he just looked on. He was Chief Minister. He just looked on, nothing else.
So never a point of hopefulness.
In political terms, I'm afraid I have to say no, there was never a time. But not that it was a feeling of hopelessness. No, just feeling that why are these people not understanding the positive aspects of the life that is possible in India? Why are they so negative in their selfishness? Basically, I saw them all as selfish and putting their self-interest above the interests of the country. So that made me sad, but of course, there was nothing I could do about that except feel bad about it.
Right. In 2019, you wrote a piece about being distressed at the election results. You wrote this line: I found myself staring into the silence of the losers. Pretty powerful line. Was your disappointment directed at the electorate?
As a citizen, of course. See, there's a big difference in people like Vajpayee, for example, and Narendra Modi. See, Vajpayee's BJP was acceptable to me because Vajpayee had a larger view. He had a patriotic view of India, and he was a proud Indian. Whereas, by contrast, somebody like Narendra Modi, although they both belong to the same party, he is a selfish man who sees his prosperity as equivalent to the prosperity of the country. It's very different. Vajpayee's BJP is acceptable. Narendra Modi's BJP is despicable.
This reminds me of the political satirist P.G. O'Rourke, who died recently. He was a conservative who flipped and decided to vote for Hillary Clinton in 2016. And his explanation was that Hillary is wrong about absolutely everything, but she's wrong within the normal parameters. Now, you spoke of disappointment. If you had to direct your disappointment at one group of people?
Well, that's not easy. I would, in a sense of generalization, I would say, I would blame the people who think in communal terms. As I said, all BJP people are not like that.
Right.
But most of them are. At the moment, it depends a lot on the leadership. As I said, Vajpayee's leadership was different from Modi's leadership. So under Modi, I think most of his party people are communal. And communal in a bad, negative sense. Doesn't help this country. But he is the Prime Minister. What do you do? So the present situation is, according to me, that under the Prime Minister's influence, because he is Prime Minister, his influence goes very deep. And under that kind of influence, things are pretty bad for the country.
So is he the enabler?
He is an enabler in the sense that he is in power.
Right.
He is the only, in that sense, he is the only enabler.
Right.
But that, I don't know whether that word carries the full implications of the situation.
To pull back a little and talk about the larger world, Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilizations was prescient. You had written about that some years ago.
I don't remember.
He wrote it as an essay in Foreign Affairs, and then that became a fat book. His premise was that with the Soviet Union falling, America needed a new enemy, and that would be Islam. You had written about some of his nifty predictions. For example, the rise of Turkey as a non-Arab Islamic power center.
Yeah, I have a vague memory, yes.
Right. And this may be a little roundabout, but you were once quoted as having cited Umberto Eco and his proposition that fascism was essentially faith-based. Faith in axioms such as doctrine supersedes reason, science is suspect, arguments are tantamount to anti-nationalism. This is happening all over the world, isn't it now? So is the effort to create a more equitable post-war world, things like secularism in India, for instance, is that a failing or failed experiment? It has only been 75 years.
In a sense, yes, because secularism has not succeeded in India. So the direct answer to your question is yes, it is a failure, because communalism has got the upper hand, and it's the ruling circles today. It's the accepted philosophy. In that sense, it's a failure. But so who do you blame? Whose fault is it? Is it the fault of me and the citizen? To a large extent, you can say yes. But what chance do I have? The only chance I have is voting time.
Yes.
Vote. And voting obviously has helped the present regime or whoever is in the government at that time. So what does it prove? I don't know what it proves. It does prove that someone, the vote of someone like me is wasted. It doesn't bring forth any result.
Right.
Is that my fault? Is that democracy's fault? What? I don't know.
Well, whosever fault it might be, did we not see this coming?
I don't think that's a fair question, because when you go for democracy, when you establish democracy in the best possible ways, you don't expect these negative things. You expect that the system will work. So those who thought of democracy, who thought of introducing democracy into the Indian system, I don't think it's fair to blame them. They had the best of intentions.
Right.
And citizens who went with them, we also had the best of intentions. We had the best of hopes. Something went wrong. We know what went wrong, but...
Culturally, are we ready for democracy? And with that, whatever comes with it, like secularism?
I think we definitely were ready. We were ready during Gandhi's days.
Right.
We were ready during Nehru's days. And we exercised that duty, that power very, very correctly, very nicely, beyond anybody's questions. But then something went wrong. I remain today what I was under Nehru or,
Yes.
or under Gandhi. And I still vote on that premise,
Right.
with that confidence, with that feeling that my vote counts. But my vote doesn't count now. Somebody else's vote counts. So something has happened in between. Now, what is it that has happened? And that's where my answer is that communalism has grown. In the early days, in Nehru's days, or when I started voting, there was no communalism. So the question is, we have to analyze when did this religious communal feeling start and why did it start, under whom did it start? That should be the deciding or dividing point. Before that, one India, after that is another India.
So was the democracy per se, the way things were set up during Gandhi, Nehru's time and the years that came soon afterwards, was the acceptance of this a heartfelt acceptance of people, or was there something simmering under the surface always?
No, that was a natural acceptance because it was a natural happening. India had a democratic tradition even before independence.
Sure.
And after independence under Nehru and Gandhi, the spirit of democracy grew very strong. So what happened was all natural things at that time. But then the atmosphere changed and everything else changed with that.
So do you accept the inevitability of the absurd?
I don't accept it as a citizen. I accept it as a thinking person. Mm-hmm. That this is bound to happen because of various reasons. If, as a citizen, if I accept it, then all is gone. So even if there's nothing I can do about it, I should stand up and say, I don't accept this.
As a writer and a journalist that has proved to be completely neutral in his writing, this question, how much of your neutrality can you surrender to personal conviction?
Why should the personal convictions be in a contrasting position to neutrality?
So can you really disengage completely?
Not disengage, but be neutral. There's a difference between disengagement and neutrality. You can be engaged and be neutrally engaged.
Right.
That, I think, is what I'm doing.
Yes.
I'm very engaged. I'm not at all disengaged from what's happening around. But I'm not engaged with any ideology in my mind. I don't have any axe to grind. I look at things as a citizen, and I look at things as an Indian, and as a world citizen too. But the question is there something that is wrong in the basic assumptions behind an idea? If there is something wrong, I say it is wrong.
Many writers of repute don't seem to rock the same kind of neutrality that you do.
I don't know. Maybe because other people have an ideological inclination. I don't have.
Not even in your columns, of which you have written many. And there was this talk you gave to some journalists in Mysore. And you said, I think there is no shame in admitting that the days of old style, he said, she said, journalism are gone. Journalism should not be partisan, but it should also not be stenographic journalism. The whole concept of objectivity in journalism needs to be revisited. What did you mean by that?
Anything that I write has a point of view very clearly stated. Mm-hmm. There is no objectivity there. Right? But objectivity only in terms of partisanship, party politics, individual loyalties, and so on. That is to be avoided. But objectivity should not be avoided in terms of larger realities of life.
I understand.
That is the difference between that I see between objectivity of one kind, objectivity of another kind.
I understand. And in the same session, you also said this: journalism is getting less and less important. What are your feelings on this?
I'm of course unhappy that journalism is getting less important. Very unhappy, because that is the only profession that I know and the only profession that I've practiced all these years, and I believe in that. So I'm sorry about that. But it's losing ground because people are not using journalism with the integrity that is required. People are using journalism for other purposes, for promoting their private interests, ideologically or personally.
Right.
Ideological interest, personal interest. But when you use journalism for that kind of purpose, journalism itself gets diminished in value.
When was the time that this was any different?
Generally speaking, I think the early years of independence, journalists like Potan Joseph, journalists like Chalapati Rao,
Right.
These are people who made journalism not only respectable but highly honored profession. Now, that kind of journalism, why did they succeed? Why did they become such great journalists? Because while they had their own belief systems, they did not owe any loyalty to any particular person or individual or even ideology. So their opinions, the points of view that they projected were respected by readers. Readers believed in them.
Right.
That kind of culture is to a large extent lost.
And most the pity. Your writing is frequently humorous. So what makes TJS George laugh? Where do you keep your funny bone?
Questions like
This question. I beat you to it.
Yeah.
I'd like to segue to your book now, The Dismantling of India. I'll start with a formulaic question. How did you pick the 35 personalities? I mean, that's a fairly diverse bunch. You have people from politics, from the arts, from the science. You have business people, cads, scoundrels. You have...
And you've already mentioned that you said there are people from politics. Yes. So scoundrels are covered there.
Well, how did you pick them?
As a journalist, I have a sense of understanding who is newsworthy. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, Veerappan is as much newsworthy, if not more, than many of our politicians.
Right.
So that's what shall I call, sixth sense? Mm-hmm. It is that sense that makes me pick somebody as newsworthy or otherwise.
The people you picked, were they acquaintances? Have you known them personally?
Oh, that is immaterial. I don't know. I don't think I have personally impacted with many of them or any of them, in fact.
But all of them were picked because they had an impact on the country and therefore on our lives. Correct?
Yeah. Otherwise, it won't be worth writing them about them.
Some of the people that you elected to write about are surprising inclusions. Harshad Mehta, for one.
But hasn't it influenced a big part of India? A stockbroker can do a lot of evil, just as he can do a lot of good for the country.
Right.
Harshad Mehta was something of a genius, if I remember right. But he used his genius capabilities for the wrong ends. But that does not detract from his importance. You see, evil people are also important in the making of a country. So that is the way I look at people and pick my subjects for a book.
And equally, Veerappan.
Oh, Veerappan is one of my favorites. I think he was a good man. But he was a good man. He did a lot of good things. Anyway, he's one of my favorites, if I may use that word, in life.
I can't say I'm surprised by the inclusion of Nathuram Godse, but could you dwell on that?
Yeah, wasn't Godse an important factor in the shaping of Indian history? Mm-hmm. When you think about it, Godse is as important, if not more important, than a lot of other people. Yeah.
As an aside, how did you feel when you heard about the assassination of Gandhi?
I mean, one can be cynical about it and say that a lot of great people have been assassinated.
Yes, they have.
Godse helped Gandhi reach that special league with people like Abraham Lincoln and so on. But that would be a cynical way of looking at it. No, Godse definitely contributed to the shaping of Indian history through that action of his. But I would not say that is a mature way of looking at politics.
Speaking of mature politics, a large part of Indian history, recent Indian history, was influenced by Indira Gandhi.
Yeah.
When the emergency happened, were you surprised?
When the emergency happened, I was not in India. I was living abroad.
Right.
So I did not have any personal exposure to that.
Right.
But I came to India at that time and I knew what it meant. And it was such a tragedy. I thought India deserved better than that.
The shaping of Indira Gandhi as a politician and a person moved by patronage principally, there's a point of view that flowed from Nehru.
No, that would be unfair to Nehru because Nehru had a universal vision. Mm-hmm. He was an Indian leader, but he was intellectually and politically was a much bigger man than most Indians of his generation. So he had a worldview, and he fitted India into that, which made it very different from what Indira Gandhi did. Indira Gandhi was a person who suffered from some kind of complexes, and she fitted India into that complex personal politics. Unfortunate that didn't help India at all, according to me.
Right. Your chapters on Tamil Nadu politicians are fascinating. You have Annadurai, Karunanidhi, MGR, Jayalalitha. You credit C.N. Annadurai with expressing or explaining the Dravidian ethic, the creed, to the world. Is the incidence of a high level of education in that state, like it is in Kerala, is that one reason why it would thwart divisive religion-based parties from making it in the elections?
No, the coincidence is that these happen to be South Indian.
Right.
Education is yes, it's a factor, but as I said, South Indian is culturally, civilizationally different in his attitude than from the North Indian. So all these points that you raised are there because we are South Indians and we look at things in a different way.
Right.
The Aryans have a different viewpoint. And I'm glad that the Dravidians, or I feel that the Dravidian outlook is more cosmopolitan, more civilized.
I don't believe I've heard that sentiment expressed quite so freely. Now, in many ways, I see this book that you have written as something of an autobiography. Would that be fair to call it that?
In a sense, any book is an autobiography of the author. But in a particular sense.
Right.
And in that sense, this is an autobiography. Why did I pick those people? But they reflect my opinions, not my personality.
Nor your approval.
No. There are people whom I don't approve.
Right.
So, no, yeah, I don't think it's, how do I put it? It's an objective, journalistic selection of people who influence current life, who influence the way you and I live our lives, rightly or wrongly.
Well, it's a wonderful book. I couldn't put it down. Read it in one sitting. For our listeners, there's a link in the podcast description to where you can buy a copy of The Dismantling of India. This has been a pleasure and an honor. TJS George, thank you so much for being my guest today on The Literary City.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
You have been listening to the renowned journalist TJS George. And I'll be back with that fun segment, What's That Word?, where we look at words and phrases that we use all the time but never stop to think about. In a minute, or less than a minute, depending on where you are. And I'm back. It's What's That Word? And here she is, my co-host, introducing herself.
Hello. My name is Praniti, but you can call me P. That's P with an A, not another E.
Hello, P with an A. So did you enjoy all that?
I did. I mean, what a great interview. I totally enjoyed it.
Well, thanks. But it's TJS George. What do you expect? Wit, wisdom, what have you?
Totes. And he has been such a fixture in our reading for all these years. I mean, 94 years old. How inspiring.
I did refer to him being 94 years old because that's unusual. But let me tell you, in practical terms, there was nothing that was material to his age that I could find.
That's fascinating. Hey, and by the way, I enjoyed your article in the Hindu.
Thanks. That's, it was a real pleasure to interview a veteran interviewer like TJS George.
So wouldn't he be the oldest living working journalist in India?
Or anywhere, I would have said. But Google threw up another gentleman somewhere in the Northeast-ish. He has 1 year more on George.
Wow.
Yeah.
So would you say George was fun or challenging to interview?
Challenging? No, not if you do your homework. But fun, yes. Most importantly, his answers to my questions were so precise and so tight, to the point and brief.
I wondered actually how you packed that much into less than 30 minutes.
Because of him, because he was so precise. And that's another reason he was a total pleasure to interview.
It showed. And he looks great, by the way. I mean, say didn't Bangalore Monthly once vote him one of Bangalore's sexiest men?
Yes. That was Radha Thomas. She wrote about this. She picked a bunch of men in Bangalore who clearly moved her needle at the time.
Yeah, I know. I read that piece in the archives.
Huh.
But what was her criteria? I mean, I'm guessing men of substance, right?
Yes, I believe so, although I have no idea what that means.
But I love the line that she had there about young, cute men.
What was that? Remind me?
She called them hors d'oeuvres, things you snack on.
You see, this is why I have never been either young or gym fit.
Yeah, right.
But George has always been dapper and stylish. I saw him last week when I interviewed him, and I'm no expert in male beauty, but I'll tell you, he looked really sharp.
I know. I could tell from the photos accompanying your piece in the Hindu.
That's right. Well, let's say I like him for his mind. All right? Okay. TikTok. Let's move it along. P with an A. What's that word?
In your interview, George used a word I totally love.
Which one?
Scoundrel.
That was a favorite word some years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, I've heard various uncles use it. That scoundrel.
That rascal. That bloody fool.
And blackguard.
Yes, you called?
Very funny. Okay, now, dish on the etymology of scoundrel.
Scoundrel. It's such a nice sounding word that even Han Solo said so to Princess Leia. I can't remember the exact dialogue, but at one point I think Princess Leia calls Han Solo a scoundrel, and Han Solo's response in his own defense was, scoundrel, scoundrel. I so like that word.
It is a nice word. Scoundrel. It's such a full word.
Yeah, that's right.
But does it have any interesting background?
Well, interesting enough. So as it turns out, although the origins of the word are unknown, English etymologists agree that scoundrel sounds French.
They would, wouldn't they?
Yes, I suppose so. Well, they attribute it to the Old French to hide oneself, escondre, or in today's French, escoundre, to escape.
Yeah, I can see why.
But the earliest use of that word was tracked down to a 1589 reference as William Warner's Albion's England, or historical map of the same island. And that quote goes, "Must, I thought, give aim to such a scrub and such a saint, that scoundrel and this counterfeit, scoundrel, SKOWNDRELL, scoundrel."
Yeah, but does it rhyme with anything?
I don't think so. Well, not directly, but I will swirl that thought around in my round skull.
Nice. I think they call that a spoonerism.
They do.
Yeah, so back to good old etymology.
Right. Okay. After 1589, the trail goes cold. And then the word starts appearing all over the place in popular literature of the day by writers we consider classical.
Which writers?
Shakespeare, for instance. He used the word scoundrel in the Twelfth Night in 1601.
Okay, but that's it. You said writers, plural.
Okay, all right. You want to know more? Here we go. Charles Dickens in David Copperfield. Henry Fielding in Tom Jones. George Eliot, or Mary Ann Evans as you like, in Mill on the Floss. Jane Austen in Sense and Sensibility.
Okay, and who else?
All right. Famously, Samuel Johnson, who in 1775 said, "Patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel." Remember that?
Yes, of course. I remember that, yeah.
And TJS George paraphrased that in the title of his book on politics, "The First Refuge of Scoundrels."
And now we've come a full circle. How fascinating all this.
Definitely. Growing up, I thought that scoundrels and blackguards were people one's grandfather mildly disliked.
And now I have a dinner date with a scoundrel of my own tonight.
Takes one to know one, I guess.
Hey.
And that's our show. Thank you so much for being here and for listening. I'd like to thank my guest, TJS George, and my co-host, Pranati P. with an A, Madhav. And just one more thing before you go. Remember to hit that subscribe button on wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. Why miss an episode of The Literary City? Well, have a fun week and see you again next Wednesday.